How many things have you started that you know are in your best interest to do, but then you stop yourself halfway through, or you start and take one step forward, and then you feel like you take three steps back, and you start back up, and you take a couple of steps forward again, and then you go back, right? We've all done this at one point or another. I know for me, my biggest example of this was when I wanted to lose weight. I was really, really overweight, and I knew for my own sake, for the way I felt, for just my self-esteem in general and my sense of self-worth that I needed to do something about it. So I would go on these crazy diets and lose a bunch of weight, but then a month or two after I would gain it all back. Or I would just really show great restraint and try to use my willpower as much as I could. And if you heard last week's episode, you know how I feel about willpower. But anyway, I would try to use what I thought I had at my disposal, and I would make some progress, but then step back. And technically, out there and in modern lingo, we call this self-sabotage, and that's what I was doing. I was self-sabotaging the progress that I made. So I would show some improvement, make some strides forward, and then pull myself back. And there was no external force that I could point to. There was nothing or no one else that I could blame except myself. And it's really aggravating when you're at that point, because you're like, oh, come on, you know what to do. You obviously can do this because you do it. And then you backtrack and you backpedal, and you just don't understand what is going on or how to get yourself past that. So today I want to share with you some things that are going to help you not to fall prey to self-sabotage as often as you are accustomed to, or as often as you have in the past. And even if it's not something that affects you all that much, we all have moments and areas in our life in which we tend to sabotage ourselves. And we're going to talk about why that happens, what we can do to stop ourselves when we feel that it's starting, and what we can do to prevent it moving forward. So in this conversation, we're going to talk about how to not fall prey to this thing that we call self-sabotage, and how to make progress forward without pulling ourselves back. I hope you're ready for this conversation. And before we dive in, don't forget to let anyone in your life who might benefit from it, let them know about this show, this program, this episode, so they can tune in and benefit from it as well. I'll see you in a second. You need confidence to move forward. Without confidence, you can't really achieve that dream, desire, calling, or lofty element, venture that you've had in your heart to do. Have you heard that before? That's what most experts and gurus out there sell you. Well, I have a slightly different take on it. I believe that you and I can create a feeling and a sense of confidence on demand that can propel us forward without us having to jump through all the hoops and try to figure out all the things that the gurus never really tell you how to do anyway. So if you have been struggling with this notion that you need more confidence, or if you simply have a goal, a dream, an aspiration, a movement, something that you want to start in this world, an impact that you want to have in others, and an influence that you want to use to support and help and do some good out there in the world, then I invite you to head on over to confidence.marciamaro.com, where you are going to find an amazing offer for my course, Confidence on Demand, which will give you the 3 secrets to generating that feeling and that sense of confidence when and where you need it. So again, head on over to confidence.marciamaro.com and take advantage of this opportunity to generate and create confidence when and where you need it. And in the meantime, stick around and chat with me here on Sincerely Speaking. See you soon. So self-sabotage is this really in vogue term that you hear all over the place. And we have been convinced that self-sabotage is what really keeps us from achieving or getting to the destinations that we might be striving to get to. And there is a lot to be said for self-sabotage, right? We didn't really understand it or talk too much about it until about a decade or so ago. But I think it's important for us to understand that the issue with self-sabotage and why it becomes, or why it feels so overarching, like it affects everybody, it's because it comes in many different flavors, right? Whenever you experience anything that causes you to feel like you're taking one step forward and 2 steps back, or that causes you to feel like you make some progress, but you stall or plateau and can't get past that certain level of progress, there probably is some flavor of self-sabotage affecting the way that you're behaving and the actions that you're taking, right? Remember, I always teach that life boils down to three things: the PDA, perception, decision, and action. And what drives the progress that you see and the results that you see is your ability to perceive things in a way that is supportive of what you want to do, make decisions that align or that are congruent with the ultimate goal that you have, and then take the actions that move you in that direction, right? So self sabotage gets in the middle of one or more of those steps, or two or more of those steps, sorry, and keeps you from either perceiving things in the right way, making the right decisions, or moving forward with the actions. And so, because it can affect every stage of that progress, it can take on a myriad of different flavors or representation, like it shows up in different ways, right? And I just want to share a few of them with you, because you might be listening to me right now or watching here on YouTube and thinking, you know what, I'm not sure that self-sabotage is what really affects me. But when you hear some of these, you might go, huh, wait a minute, maybe I do fall prey to this thing. And we're going to understand why and how to get out of it in a minute. But first, I want to make sure that you recognize the flavor of self sabotage that might be affecting you. Because, like I said, 99% of us fall prey to this in one way or another, in one area of our lives or another. So, fear or anxiety over an outcome or a result. That can be. And I'm not saying that every time you feel fear or anxiety is self sabotage, but if it relates to a goal that you have, or something that you're trying to do, or a step that you need to take, or something that needs to happen that you need to make happen, and it's keeping you from moving forward, then this fear or anxiety is a flavor or a form of self-sabotage. Lack of motivation, procrastination, perfectionism. Like, we tend to think that perfectionism is almost a badge of honor, right? Like, I'm a perfectionist, I don't put anything out unless it's perfect. It's actually a form of self-sabotage, because until you feel like you can have it perfect, then you don't take the step forward, right? Or you might actually have it done and look at it and go, it isn't perfect enough, and you start over. Or it keeps you just from even trying because you don't feel you have what it takes to get it perfect. So anytime fear or doubt are connected to that perfectionism, or anytime this idea that until it's perfect you can't get it done, and perfectionism in general, I mean, how many times do we get things perfect anyway, keeps you from moving forward, then it's a form of self-sabotage. Overwhelm, especially when it's recurring, right? Like, you're constantly in a state of overwhelm. Second guessing or backpedaling, obviously, if you are back and forth, or you make a decision and then you go back on it, and that is definitely it. Laziness. We tend to think that laziness is just not wanting to do something, or just not being motivated enough. I already mentioned lack of motivation anyway, but when you fall into a pattern of laziness, especially around things that you need to do in order to advance or achieve a goal, then that is a form of self sabotage. Getting ready to get ready, that is my big one. And I still need to implement the things that we're going to talk about today in order to move myself out of it, because I can keep myself researching and asking questions and looking for more information and studying up on things and reading books and doing all these things, just getting ready to get ready, and never actually taking action. Lack of focus or attention, you're all over the place. Making up excuses. And addictions, and I'm specifically talking about addictions to validation, or to praise, or to martyrdom, right? Addictions to needing external forces to propel you forward. That's specifically what I'm talking about, but that can take any form. And I don't want to get too much into that, because I am not a therapist, psychologist, or anybody trained in dealing with those specific addictions that we usually talk about. But when we're talking about an addiction to validation, like, you can't move forward unless someone else tells you that your idea is good, or you can't do anything unless someone is praising you constantly at every step, or you act like a martyr, like, oh, nobody supports me. Those addictions to those types of things, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about self-sabotage, right? So when we are looking at why self-sabotage occurs and what it is about it that makes it so pervasive, that makes it so that so many of us fall prey to it, it's important to understand that self-sabotage is just so intensely and so intimately linked to our identity. And it is actually our identity that causes us to fall into self-sabotage. Now, a lot of what I'm going to be saying today, I learned from two amazing people, Ed Milet and Dr. Ben Hardy. So if it sounds familiar, it's probably because I learned it from them. And I added some of my little spice and special sauce into it. But a lot of the premises and the basic concepts underneath what we're going to talk about come from one or two or both of these gentlemen. So thank you, Ed Milet. Thank you, Ben Hardy, for teaching me these lessons. But here we go. So identity is directly and intimately tied to why we self-sabotage. Why do I say that? I've said this before, and if you've ever heard any of my episodes, you've probably heard some form of this, right? We don't do what we want, what we believe, or what we know we need to do. We do who we are. So if we are attempting to do anything that falls outside of our perceived identity, our brain is going to battle against that, and it's going to do everything in its power to get us back to that space where it feels like we're validating who we are. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But for now, I want you to picture two things: a thermostat and a thermometer. A thermostat and a thermometer. Most of us go through life acting like thermometers most of the time. What does a thermometer do? It takes the outside temperature, right? And it regulates itself to the outside temperature. So a lot of us, especially under social circumstances, we flex or we vary how we're behaving or how we act or what we do based on who's there or the kind of occasion it is. If you don't believe me, think about what you're like at home with your spouse and your kids, or your parents and your siblings, and what you're like at work with your boss and your colleagues. In fact, think about how you act with your boss versus how you act with your colleagues, right? That is thermometer behavior. You are adapting to your surroundings and you're just letting the surroundings dictate how you behave. But even within that, there are certain things that you won't do. There are certain things that go beyond who you are. And if you've ever said the expression, well, I just don't do that, that's just not me, that is your identity kicking in, right? So when those moments arise, when we understand that we get to live in a certain identity and that our identity gets to regulate some of what we do and how we behave, then we're activating the thermostat, right? So think about what a thermostat does. If you set a thermostat, let's say to 70 degrees, right? And you have one of those thermostats that will either kick in the AC, the cool, or kick in the heater, depending on where it's at, right? But you set it at 70 degrees. The thermostat will do whatever it needs to do to regulate the environment to the temperature that the thermostat is set to, right? So if it's 70 degrees and it gets to be 55 degrees outside, the heater is going to kick on and it's going to raise the temperature to 70 degrees. But if it goes up to 74, then the AC is going to kick on and you are going to feel the temperature drop from 74 to 70. Make sense? We all know how a thermostat works. So we have an internal thermostat that is tied to our identity. And it is going to regulate what we do, what we experience, what we behave, so that it matches the temperature that our identity is set to, the temperature that we are comfortable with, and temperature in metaphorical terms, right? So we're just doing an analogy here. But let's use money for an example, because it's just easy to understand. Let's say that your thermostat is set to, I make $75,000 a year. And that's what you're used to. That's what you're accustomed to. You make $70,000 a year, $75,000 a year, right? And let's say that one year you kick it into gear and you go, you know what? I'm capable of making more. So you use willpower, you use motivation, you use mentors, you use whatever it is that you use, and you raise your income that year to $100,000, right? For a short while, you are going to be okay with that $100,000. But unless you modify your identity, and we're going to talk more about how we do this in a second, but unless you modify that identity, sooner or later, your AC is going to kick on because it's too hot, and you're going to drop that $100,000 back to $75,000. Now, it operates in the opposite direction too. right? Let's say that something happens and you, I don't know, you lose your job or you start a business and it's rocky at first or whatever happens. And you drop from making $75,000 and that year you make 60 or 50 or less, whatever the case may be. And you're like, oh my gosh. Eventually, sooner or later, your thermostat is going to kick that heater on and you're going to do whatever you need to do to get back to at least that $75,000 because that's the level of your identity, right? And that happens in all sorts of areas. That happens in weight, that happened to me in my weight, that happens in relationships, that happens in all sorts of areas in our lives that are important. We have that internal thermostat that wants to keep us level. So as long as we don't do what we need to do in order to shift how we see ourselves and the definition of our identity at the moment, our brain is going to do whatever it needs to do to keep us at that comfort level that we have labeled as who we are right now or what we're capable of right now, that level of identity, right? So to understand this a little bit more, let's talk about standards because standards are the key to shifting the thermostat, right? So think about raising or lowering the temperature on the thermostat. We do that in our lives through the standards that we set. Now think about standards as a building that has several stories, right? Let's say that you are in a 5-story building right now and you're standing on the ground floor. When you're standing on the ground floor, you see a floor underneath you, right? Like you're standing on a floor, and then you see a ceiling. And unless you know that the building has other levels, all you see is that ground floor right now, that level in front of you. So all you see as possibility is the floor and the ceiling that are right there in that level. So the floor is your minimum required for comfort. So let's talk about money again, just to give us an image, right? In the example that I gave you, $75,000 is the floor. That is the minimum required for me to feel comfortable and for me to not have to worry that I'm going to end up under a bridge somewhere, right? That's the floor. That's the minimum required for me to feel comfortable. So that's my current standard, right? If I don't make at least $75,000, I'm not meeting my own standards. However, when I look at the ceiling, that is the highest possibility that we can see or accept at the moment. See, when you're standing on the ground floor, you can't see the second floor. You can't. All you can see is that ceiling. And that's all that exists right now in your perspective and what you're looking at. So let's say that for whatever reason, I start to think, okay, wait, I made $100,000 once. So I know that $100,000 is possible, right? In order for me to shift the thermostat, I have to work to turn that ceiling into my floor. In other words, I have to go up a level. And now I have to see that my floor, my minimum required for comfort is the $100,000. But that means I have to set a new ceiling. So maybe I look at my mentor who can make $1 million a year. And I think, well, I don't know that I can make $1 million yet. But if she can make $1 million, I bet you I can at least make 200,000. I can at least double what I made that one time, right? So now my new floor is the 100,000. My new ceiling is the 200,000. And that's where I'm going to have my thermostat playing until I can up level my standards again. Because again, your identity, if your identity doesn't match whatever it is that you're reaching for, your brain is going to activate your thermostat so that it gets you back where you belong, to your comfort zone, to the area where you are confident that you can live in, right? So how do we start shifting these things so that our standards can be validated and congruent with our identity, and so that we don't kick into gear our thermostat and start self-sabotaging our efforts? Well, it's important to understand that our identity is created by 3 things: our programs, our experiences, and our interpretations of those programs and experiences, right? So the programs, we're going to talk about all the different flavors of programs in a minute, but the more persistent these programs and experiences are, like if you experience something once, it would have to be really intense, right? So experiences are more about intensity. Programs are more about consistency or persistence. So when you experience something like real intensity, It will cement a pathway in your brain and it will tell you this is the way this works. And you would have to have something as intense or as consistent or consistent enough to offset that intensity of that experience. I'll give you an example. So I have a friend that was bitten by a dog when she was little. So her brain, because that experience was really traumatic, her brain cemented a pathway that says all dogs are dangerous, right? I have a tiny little dog that you might have seen at some point. Her name is Skylar. She is a rat terrier mix and she is 3.5 pounds. She is tiny. And so it's not just because she's tiny, because I've seen some fierce tiny dogs, but she is very subdued. She's very sweet. She doesn't bite. She barks because she can't do anything else, but she's just the sweetest dog on the planet, right? So that friend came to my house once, and when she saw Skylar, she freaked. And I was like, okay, calm down. It's okay. If you want, I will put her away. But I promise you, she might make a few noises. She will go and sniff around your legs, but that's all she's going to do. She's going to be fine. So my friend was able to sit down and calm herself down enough to allow Skylar to come by her. So that created one experience that wasn't as intense, but with persistence and consistency, she has learned that some dogs are not dangerous, right? So her level of freak out when she sees dogs is still there, but it's not as huge because now she has had enough experiences with other dogs who are good that is teaching her, wait a minute, maybe not all dogs are mean and dangerous, right? And so when you have intense experiences or persistent programming, and again, I'm going to talk more about programming in a second, but think of programming as labels that you take on through different things. And those labels are repeated enough that you accept them as part of who you are. That is part of your identity, right? And then interpretations is how we perceive those programs, those labels that are thrown our way, and those experiences that we go through, and what we do, what we make them mean, right? So those interpretations are the only things that we can really control. When we understand that we can't control the programming that is sent our way, that we can't control the experiences that we live through, but that we can, in fact, change, alter, control, and modify and work with the interpretations, and we understand that the interpretations are really the foundation of it all, then we can start working to shift those interpretations so that in the end, we reprogram ourselves to see our identity in a different light. So I hope this has been helpful to you today. I know that you're not going to fall prey to self-sabotage anymore. I know I gave you a lot in this episode, but you can go back, watch it, rewatch it, listen, re-listen. Go to confidence.marciamorrow.com so that you can get the Confidence on Demand course, which is going to supplement a lot of what we talked about today. It's going to expand on a lot of what we talked about today. And it's going to give you the 3 secrets that you need in order to generate or create that sense, that feeling of confidence when and where you need it, on demand, on the spot. So again, confidence.marciamorrow.com, go over there. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, add them in the comments, subscribe, follow so you don't miss any of our episodes. And I will see you next week on Sincerely Speaking. Bye-bye.